excitement, anticipation, angst, thirst for power. All the things you feel when you're trying to level up a character in a game. I'm Randy Brown, creator of Fists and Fiends, and today we're going to talk about leveling up your character in Fists and Fiends. Now, when designing the game, I took a lot of inspiration from other games that use an XP economy. Now, what that means is, traditionally, you'll have accumulating XP points and you just keep climbing and climbing with various benchmarks. Okay, now I'm this, now I'm that. Here's a new title. Here's some new traits and characteristics and features to that character. All that's well and good, but it can feel very flat. And there's not a lot of room for growth in between each level. So for example, back when I played Dungeons & Dragons a long time ago, the magic user, once you got to level 4 or 5, it felt like a drought in between levels. It felt like other people were advancing, like fighters and thieves, very rapidly, and it would take you forever to get to that next level. Now, the problem with that is, in between levels, there wasn't a lot to do with your character to increase their capabilities or enhance their powers in the game, other than magic items and potions and scrolls and things like that. But those are all external. There weren't really ways to tweak the characters. So in Fists and Fiends, when you accumulate XP, you actually are spending that in order to improve skills, talents, fighting techniques, and lineage. And we're going to talk about each of those today. So the first thing we'll discuss are skills. Skills are how you do everything in the game. How you attack, how you defend, the types of attacks you make, how you use a weapon, how you sneak around, how you communicate or do verbal combat or chase combat, how you swim, climb, lift something, open a door. These are things that you have to roll for when the GM decides you need to roll. Like opening a simple door, you're not going to roll for that. But if it's a heavy door that might be barricaded, the GM might say you need to roll strength to see if you can open that. When you're attacking, you have striking, you have kicking, you have grappling. All are skills. And those are things that your character needs to be good at on a regular basis. Outside of your fighting skills, when you set out creating your character, you obviously want to invest in those, but you also have to have other abilities too. There are over 16 skills that you can invest in, and trying to be a master of all of them or a jack of all trades creates a flat character who's not really good at anything. And this is where teamwork becomes super important. Is if you have a regular group that you're playing with, you start to fill in the gaps for what each character can do that they're good at. Fists and Fiends has 6 mission types that set up the action for the characters. And I'll get into that in another video. But what's important for leveling up is understanding that each of those mission types has a leader, has someone in the group who is heading up that mission. So for example, we have infiltration missions. These can be heists, they could be an assassination, they could be trying to sneak in and get intelligence on something. There are a variety of missions that would fall into the category of infiltration. And the leader of an infiltration mission is called the Shadow Master. Shadow Masters roll stealth, and that stealth roll, when you set up the mission, is to determine like how well they planned the mission and how well you were able to navigate all of the circumstances to get you to the cusp of the mission starting. So everything begins on the verge of action. We're doing a martial arts game. We want to fight. It's about the combat. So we got to get in the combat. And every mission type sets up the action. So the Shadow Master, when they make that stealth roll, it's important they have a high stealth skill. Because the amount of successes you roll, one success doesn't help. That actually is a pretty poor outcome. And you could end up going into the infiltration mission where you've tripped an alarm, or you've been spotted, or you're being jumped by guards, or you walked into an ambush, depending on how poorly you roll. The more successes you have mean you got into the infiltration mission without much trouble. So you start out on a better foot, and your group likely will have advantages to completing the mission, or you have advantages going into the fight. Maybe you got the jump on an ambush instead. Now, this is super important as you start to grow as characters because you can fill in the gaps. For example, the skirmish missions all rely on commanders. So skirmishes being assault missions, siege defense missions, or security escort missions. And in these missions, the commander has to be good at intellect, willpower, and communication. So a character interested in being a commander in those missions is going to have a vastly different skill set than one who's leading the charge on infiltrations or on recon missions. So skills all require 5 XP for one level, 10 XP for 2, 15 XP for the third level, and so on and so forth up to the maximum of level 5. And when you first start playing Fists and Fiends or build a character, you may not know what skills are going to be needed of them at the time that you build, especially if you weren't all together in a room building them as a team. First times receiving experience points, you may want to invest in skills that are completely void in the group. And that's normal. There is no perfect build. You won't know until you start playing what you're going to need for your characters. And every time you build a character, it may be a different skill set that you need. Now let's discuss talents. So there are 3 types of talents in the game. There are background talents for each character. There's their boxer talent, which is really independent from each of the 6 styles. They all have their own unique talent, which separates them and makes them feel vastly different from one another, in addition to their fighting techniques. Also, we have advanced combat talents. So the one that doesn't change are background talents. There isn't a way to level those up. Once you determine your background, what your character was before the cataclysm, before the floods, before they became a trained martial artist, that was their background. That was their occupation. And that gives them certain advantages versus other characters. However, now that you're a martial arts fighter, you have a specific background talent related to the style you picked. So for example, let's talk about the Mantis Boxer. As you can see, there's a novice level, a master level, and a fiend level. And that's the case with all the styles. All characters start out at a novice level, and then they work their way up from there. At novice level, a Mantis Boxer can spend 1 fighting spirit and gain the clinch position immediately after a successful strike, block, kick, or bridge. The opponent is stuck in your hooks. A successful escape is required for them to move. Now, normally, getting to the clinch, getting to the grapple, requires another action. So if a Mantis Boxer is attacking with a strike or kick, they don't have to waste a fast action trying to make a grapple attempt. They can just spend a fighting spirit and get to the clinch right away. Now, on the enemy's turn, they have to burn an action, a slow action, to try to escape. And if they're using their slow action to try to escape, they cannot use their slow action to attack. So you can see that's very advantageous, even at a novice level. Now, Mantis Boxers are strikers, kickers first, and then they also can grapple. But they don't start out the game with grappling techniques, with throws, trips, and takedowns. So they want to invest in fighting techniques as they go. And we'll talk about those in a minute. As you can see, the fight die changes based on the level of your character. So at novice level, you roll a d6 for your fight die. At master level, that changes to a d8. What's the difference? Well, 6s are a success. So a d6, you only have a 16% chance of success. With a d8, you get 6, 7, or 8 are all successes. So that's a big deal. You can get 3 chances on every roll to get a success. Now at fiend level, it gets even better because that's a d12. And 6 and up is still a success, but 10, 11, and 12 all equal 2 successes. So fiend level is amazing. You have a lot of chance of actually landing your attacks or your defenses, and then being able to follow up with your fighting talent, your boxer talent afterwards. So as you can see, at master level, not only do you get the D8 fight die, but you gain a +1 to block strikes, +1 to attack with any hook style takedown. While grappling, you can use your hooks to hang on your prey. Your opponent now has to roll stamina at the end of a round while stuck in your clinch. 1 might damage is received for their character if they fail to get out of the clinch. So you're draining them in the fight. You're dragging them down and you're exhausting them as you go. Now at Fiend level, you also get that D12, but you can spend 2 Fighting Spirit for an immediate +2 attack with an elbow or knee strike. Also require the clinch to be in those. Or a hook style throw, trip, or takedown after a successful strike, block, kick, or bridge. Crazy Ghost Fist and Monkey Steals Peach, which are stunts, can now be used as attack stunts, not just defense stunts. So as you level up your character, there are drastic changes in what they can do and how they can affect the enemies around them. However, each of those gaps requires a ton of XP. So in order to do, let's say, master level in the Silt Road campaign, where there are 13 missions, you can earn a possible maximum of 10 XP on each mission. You don't usually get 10 XP. Sometimes it may only be 3. Other times you may earn 6, 7, 8. Very rarely do you get all 10. And master level requires 55 XP. So if somebody is really dedicated to getting to master level in that campaign, they can do it potentially if they survive that long, but they won't be able to build out a robust character, which is where we were going with being able to advance skills in the middle of these major level changes and add fighting techniques. Every character starts out with 4 techniques except for the elemental boxer. They start with 5. However, they can't add any as they go, or they risk breaking their ability to channel the elements. If they break that, they're now just a striker. They're no longer an elemental boxer. So it behooves them to stick to that 5 that they start out with at the beginning of the game. However, all of the other characters, they start out with their 4, and they can increase fighting techniques from there. But it doesn't mean that you should collect fighting techniques. You want to use them to fill in gaps. Let's say, for example, you have an Eagle Claw boxer and you rolled all submissions on your character creation. Yes, fighting techniques are rolled, not picked. And that creates a randomness and means that you're not just picking the techniques that do the most damage. So let's say as you're going along, you realize that, oh, Eagle Claw, I'm grappler, I'm a submission specialist. I want to be able to choke as well, but I didn't roll any chokes. So you may want to buy a choke technique to add to your arsenal. Now that means not only do you have to spend 4 XP, but you have to find a teacher who will show you that technique, that knows the techniques, has more skills than you, and you then have to roll intellect to see if you actually learned it. There's an alternative way. And this becomes very important for, say, the Mantis boxer. Because, as I said, they're a striker kicker, but they want to get to the point that they can do hook-style trips, takedowns, and throws. So they can add those to their arsenal simply by saying, I want to try, for example, a hanging hook against this bad guy. So they're going to roll an unskilled attempt at that technique. So that means their character could just have organically come up with the move in the middle of combat if they succeed at it. And that means they roll just their sleight and their fight die, but they don't get to roll their grapple standing. Upon success, not only did they pull off the technique, but at the end of the session, when it's time to spend XP, they could tell the GM, I want to spend 4 XP and make that technique one of mine permanently. And then they get to write it on their character sheet as one of their several techniques. So that gives you the ability to grow your character without having to then go find somebody to learn a technique from. But you risk not being able to pull it off because you don't get to add your skill dice to that roll. That works with any fighting technique in the game. Let's talk about advanced combat talents. Advanced combat talents drastically change the capabilities of your fighter. But they will all require prerequisites and other skills before you can get these, before you can purchase them. So even though the purchase of an advanced combat talent doesn't cost a lot of XP, it costs an exorbitant amount to get your skills high enough to be able to take advantage of them. And that's to represent the amount of training and skill required to pull off these fancy stunt-like skills in the middle of a combat. Now, let's take this one, for example, Alacritus Ambush. You need a grapple standing score of 5, level 5. So that means the max you can build your character out at the beginning of the game is a level 3. So you would have to spend 45 XP to be able to get to a level 5 skill to be able to take on this talent. So your throw, trip, takedown attempt is thwarted, or is it? The enemy is unaware that this first assault was a feint. You quickly and adeptly follow up with a second attack. Whenever your first throw, trip, takedown fails, you immediately follow up with a second attempt. Choose a different takedown from your arsenal. Roll your next attack. The second attack counts as a fast action. You must have a fast action available. So that's a big deal. That can change things very rapidly on the battlefield. However, it takes a lot of XP to be able to get there. And all the time that you're trying to level up those skills, you're also missing out on being able to bring up your boxer talent or add fighting techniques. It really depends what you want to invest in. The advantage of increasing your grapple standing score, regardless of Alacritus Ambush or any other advanced combat talent that you want, means that every time you roll a die, you add an extra die for each skill level. So you started the game with, say, a maximum of level 3 grapple standing. You could now have 5 dice every time you roll. So if you had a slight score of 5, and then you have a level 5 grapple standing, you get 10 dice plus your fight die. That can be a great advantage when you're in the middle of fighting and your primary attacks are grappling attacks. Now let's talk about Lineage. This is something that I added to the game after I had built it out for a while, and I thought about the long-term ramifications of maxing out a character. What if you reach that upper limit? It's very rare. Very rare. To get to Fiend level is going to take a lot of work and a lot of experience playing the game, or a lot of luck, or a combination of all three, most likely. So to be able to get to that is extremely difficult. But in the off chance that someone gets a character to the Fiend level, what happens in a lot of RPGs is you just end up with this flat end game where the characters can't really level up anymore. They're maximum power, things are easy, or they just drag out the combat to these really long phases that it takes forever for each player to take their turn. So in Fists and Fiends, if you get to a Fiend level, one, the combat is not going to drag out. That's not the point of the game. But there still isn't really any reward. Maybe you've already increased the skills that you want to increase. Maybe you already have enough fighting techniques, and you have 1 or 2 advanced combat talents. So continuing to invest in that character when at any given moment they could get killed by a well-placed matchlock shot, what you want to start thinking about at that stage is Lineage. What you're doing from there on is trying to invest in the next generation of someone within your boxer style. So if you're an Eagle Claw boxer and you're at a Fiend level, you can then go out on every mission and bank your XP, but invest it in your student when you get back. So essentially what you're doing as a player is creating a second Eagle Claw boxer that's a novice, but you're leaving that on the side, and every time you play, your Fiend level boxer is now pumping experience points into improving the skills and fighting techniques of your new character before you ever get to play them. Once you reach a certain point, you want to start playing that new character, your other character goes into retirement, and they're added to the lineage tree by your GM, and there they will stay forevermore. As long as you keep playing in that campaign, in that world, and you have not reset, that character that reached that high of a level is now a fixed and recognized individual in the entire world and campaign as you go forward. That pretty much covers leveling up in Fists and Fiends. There's some other details I didn't get to or left out, but we'll go over those down the road, or you'll learn about them after you get the game, which is currently on Kickstarter right now. For the next couple weeks, you can still go in and back the campaign and help get this game published. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you next week.